Welcome to this explainer. We are jumping right into a truly fascinating clash today, a collision between a highly complex individual and a very rigid institutional system. But here's the twist. We aren't going to look at this through the usual political or legal filters. Instead, we're analyzing this case purely through the scientific lens of positive psychology, using some incredible meta-analyses generated by multiple AI models.
So here's a roadmap for the day. First, we'll establish the facts in the case of Dr. Chen. Then, we'll introduce the positive psychology lens, look at strengths in extreme adversity, break down the systems deficit model, and wrap up with post-traumatic growth.
Let's start with Section 1, the case of Dr. Chen, and get straight to the neutral facts of what actually happened.
This timeline really represents the Crucible itself. Dr. Chen Jingyuan, who holds a PhD in physics and complex systems, was arrested in Kunming in September 2022. He was eventually sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison for using a VPN to retweet articles, art, and commentary over a 3-year period. Now, the court deemed these actions a disruption of public order, officially charging him with picking quarrels and provoking trouble. By July 2023, after an appeal was rejected without a hearing, he was transferred to prison.
But here is where it gets interesting. During his trial, Dr. Chen drafted a massive 20,000-word defense letter. Instead of just leaning on standard legal arguments, he used his extensive scientific background. He literally invoked Plato's cave, arguing that social networks are inherently chaotic, complex systems. Because of that complexity, he reasoned that it's mathematically and physically impossible for a peripheral user, like himself, to severely disrupt public order.
Moving right along to Section 2, the positive psychology lens.
What makes this entire analysis so unique is that multiple AI models reviewed Dr. Chen's defense not as a legal dispute, but as a rich psychological dataset. You see, instead of looking at what is broken or pathological, which is what traditional psychology often does, positive psychology asks a totally different question. It asks, what keeps a person functioning, growing, and retaining their dignity in extreme adversity? It focuses purely on the human capacity to flourish, even when placed in highly restricted environments.
To put this into perspective, this breakdown beautifully illustrates the famous PERMA model created by Martin Seligman. It shows exactly how Dr. Chen managed to fulfill his core psychological needs while physically isolated in detention. For instance, he achieved intense cognitive engagement through theoretical construction, and he found profound meaning by elevating his trial into a historical record. Psychologically speaking, he was actively building a framework to maintain his cognitive integrity.
That brings us to Section 3, strengths in extreme adversity.
So what exact psychological resources was he using? Well, according to the AI meta-analyses, Dr. Chen exhibited a highly convergent profile of character strengths. He used his wisdom and knowledge, specifically his interdisciplinary exploration of physics and law, as a literal shield against his environment. He showed immense courage and integrity by refusing to alter his stance for short-term legal gain. And he demonstrated transcendence by viewing his individual struggle from a much broader civilizational perspective. Driven by this deep need for intellectual autonomy, Dr. Chen focused intensely on science, logic, and history. And by doing so, he engaged in what psychologists call flow. He essentially hacked a hostile, restrictive environment and turned it into a space for profound cognitive engagement, rather than just acting out of mere defiance.
This brings up the concept of meaning-centered coping. It echoes the famous psychiatrist Viktor Frankl's theory that humans can endure any how if they have a why. Dr. Chen survived by transforming his individual suffering into a pursuit of truth. He saw his 20,000-word defense not merely as a plea for physical freedom, but as an objective, historical record for future generations. Now let's flip the script for Section 4, the systems deficit model. Turning that psychological lens around to examine the judicial system itself, the AI analyses consistently highlighted a severe negativity bias. This is a classic deficit model. Within this specific framework, an individual's critical thinking and intellectual curiosity aren't viewed as strengths or virtues. Instead, they are perceived strictly as risks or threats that the system feels must be contained.
And this right here is essentially the climax of our analysis. It is a profound structural clash. On one side, you have an individual operating entirely on drivers of meaning, growth, truth, and autonomy. On the other side, you have an institutional system designed entirely around risk, control, deficit focus, and compliance. So you can see it's not just a legal disagreement at all. It's a complete collision of two entirely incompatible psychological operating systems. Because of this deficit focus, the system exhibited what analysts call anti-resilience. And this showed up in a few ways. First, through risk amplification, basically equating academic curiosity with a societal threat. Second, through a presumption of malice, inferring intentional harm from complex philosophical retweets. And finally, through rigid proceduralism. The court famously dismissed Dr. Chen's use of the CAP theorem, which is a computer science principle about network limitations, to explain social media behavior. The system simply chose to suppress the anomaly rather than adapt to or learn from the individual's intellectual defenses.
Finally, let's look at the aftermath in Section 5, Post-Traumatic Growth.
While the legal outcome of incarceration was definitive, psychologically speaking, the extreme pressure forced a profound leap in his personal development. In psychology, this is known as post-traumatic growth. It's when struggling with a severe, highly stressful life crisis actually pushes a person to a much higher level of psychological functioning.
Dr. Chen's defense letter stands as a literal textbook example of this growth. He deepened his worldview by applying advanced systems theory to make sense of his own trial. He strengthened his core values by flat-out refusing to compromise on scientific truth. And he elevated his existential meaning, completely transitioning his identity from a private scholar to a witness of history. For him, the very act of writing that defense was what protected his mental integrity.
At the end of the day, what these AI meta-analyses reveal is that this case serves as a profound sociological observation. It is a real-world stress test between human potential, our inherent drive to flourish and seek meaning, and institutional limitations, the rigid mandate to control and manage risk.
And that brilliantly illustrates why this specific case matters to all of us, leaving us with a really critical question to ponder. Does our society design its systems to control human deficits or to foster human flourishing? Think about it. Are the ecosystems we live and work in built merely to manage our flaws, or are they truly capable of elevating our greatest strengths? Something to keep in mind the next time you look at the institutions around you. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you next time.